Hey guys, and welcome to Harboring Chaos. So today I'm going to do a really quick video on something that is super important. It's a much shorter video than the previous one, but I do think it's at least as important, if not even more important, than the previous video. In case you don't remember, the big takeaway from the previous video is 1. Try to stay young at heart and think with your heart. In addition to that, remember that as you grow older and more conservative, it's not because you have a brain or whatever, right? It's probably because you're becoming more calloused and your experience is telling you to be a little bit more cautious and, probably a little bit more, fear driven, that kind of stuff. So just be vigilant of that. Be conservative in where you need to be, but keep in mind that it doesn't mean that you're smarter or have a brain as you grow older and be more conservative, okay? It's unfortunate because older people will rationalize and think that they're smarter because they're conservative, but it's the opposite. They're probably, we talked about this in the previous video. Older people, for everyone, myself included, our mental, cognitive abilities decline as we age, right? So we're not smarter. If anything, we become maybe sometimes more cruel, right? And more selfish and more fear-driven, but more experienced, which can be a good thing. But so there, college protests around the universities are always refreshing and a good thing to keep us as a society and as individuals in check, okay? We talked about what Harboring Chaos is all about. So we introduced this channel and we talked about the 5 core principles of Harboring Chaos. I'll touch on the 5 principles when we stop this video today, okay, at the very end. So today's video, what are we going to talk about? Very interesting story in the news recently. Basically, here's what happened. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, right? One of the Supreme Court justices. It's been seen at his at least 2 different homes where he's hung questionable flags, right? One flag is like the upside down American flag that was seen hanging from his home right after the January 6th riots, right? The Capitol riots. Apparently that upside down American flag represents like the Stop the Steal movement. That's interesting. Stop the steal, right? Now, the other flag that was recently seen hanging from one of his other homes is the Appeal to Heaven flag. Let me just go ahead and show you this Appeal to Heaven flag right here, right? This flag right here was seen hanging from one of his homes, right? I think that might be the flag right there, or maybe his home, his vacation home or something like that. Now, this Appeal to Heaven flag is interesting. Obviously, you can read up on the origin of this flag, right? But basically, it's pretty obvious, right? Appeal to heaven, appeal to God, that kind of stuff, right? As a nation, we need to appeal to God, right? But this is coming from a Supreme Court justice, which is interesting, right? Because a lot of times we talk about separation of church and state. So today I'm going to talk about why, 1, I love the fact that this flag is seen hanging from one of his homes. I do find it funny though that he, when asked by reporters or something like that, he says that, well, both of these flags, the upside down flag, American flag, and the Appeal to Heaven flag was hung by his wife, not him. I think it's kind of a cop out and very funny and even childish. Maybe as a mockery to everyone that he's saying it's his wife, it's not him hanging the flags, but it's his wife. I think that's hilarious, right? And I don't care who's hanging the flag. But I do think that it's great. I want to see people express themselves like this. And I even want to talk about how silly that quote is, right? Or that phrase that we learned as kids and we believe exists, which is separation of church and state. So I want to tell you why I think that's such a silly, I guess, quote and a silly idea that we need to move away from, right? Separation of church and state. So before I do that, a few anecdotes. And by the way, we will try to write something very short today as well, too, just like we did in the previous video. I actually don't even know what we're going to write yet, so just be ready for that, okay? So that's why I have this document open, because we're going to write, maybe not a poem today, but just a small little essay about, our ideas. We'll do that at the end. So separation of church and state. Before I go on and talk about that idea and why I think it's kind of meaningless, and maybe even detrimental to us, like thinking in terms of separation of church and state, I'll give you a few anecdotes, personal anecdotes. So just the other day, I don't think I was even thinking about Samuel Alito and him hanging these flags, right? I was actually, so I teach English as a second language, where I volunteer to teach at a church, out of this church very close by. And this is a church that lends us, its facilities or its classroom so we can teach out of this church. So we're very grateful for that, right? Me and the other volunteers. But in order for me to get to this church, I have to drive down this road that I call Church Row, because I've always been fascinated with why on this church, on this road, I see churches everywhere. Like every block, there's a church. And after like maybe 15 churches or something, then I get to our church, the church that I'm teaching out of, right? So I call it Church Row, right? Church Row. Now, it's always been, I guess, interesting to me why we have so many churches. So my question to you, first and foremost, is why do we have so many churches? Why can't there just be one church? Why not just one church for everyone, right? So I want you to think about that. So I would even encourage that if you haven't thought about it much, stop watching this video now and come back to it later, because I'm going to tell you why I believe we have so many churches, right? And again, I'm going to tell you why I think the idea of separation of church and state is really, really silly and detrimental to us. So related to this was what happened to me a few days ago. I was talking to a friend. By the way, this friend, I mentioned him in the previous video. It's the same friend. I asked him, I was like, hey, why do we have so many churches? And he responded to me in such a fascinating way. He asked me back. He didn't answer, but he asked me back. He was like, why do we have so many languages? Right? So as soon as he asked me, why do we have so many languages? It stopped me in my tracks, because I was like, well, so of course I started thinking about that, right? And I do want to tell you all right now that we're going to have so many videos where we talk about language, okay? Because language is so important to so many things. And I even believe that our understanding of language needs to be tweaked a little bit in order to better help humanity out a little. But we'll talk more about language later on. We won't spend too much time talking about language, just a little bit here. So, I thought about that. So my friend responded to my question, which is, why do we have so many churches? With his own question, why do we have so many languages? And I love his response, because it's so tied to why we have so many churches. We have so many languages because one of the reasons why, right? One obvious one is because we have so many people. People come from all over the place, right? Can't expect, two different groups of people from different sides of the planet to just come up with the same languages, right? Even though the goals are the same, which is to communicate, to interact with one another, the languages, on the surface may look different, right? Different words, different, sounds, that kind of stuff. But the goals are the same, so that humans can communicate and interact with one another. And then when globalization starts happening, people start, meeting each other and maybe even moving to where, the others live, whatever. They bring their languages, they bring their culture and their languages, right? So that's why we have a lot of languages. And it's a beautiful thing, right? Obviously. And that's probably why, or that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of churches. People bring, their ideas and their culture and their languages to different places. And if they come to a place, they live there for a while and they're like, you know what, let's create our own church. So all of a sudden a church pops up, right? Because of course, churches represent at least two different things, right? Like a physical building or a place where people meet and congregate. But also when we talk about church, we're talking about like a community, right? A community of people, buildings, and of course, ideas and beliefs, right? So that's what we refer to that's what we mean when we refer to church, right? So obviously I'm not a churchgoer, but if I were, I'd probably look for a church close to me, right? To make it convenient. What else? At this church, I'm hoping to find people who, I get along with, right? I have something in common with, at least language-wise, maybe. because it helps. Because hell, if I can't talk to them at all, might as well just stay at home, right? But from a belief standpoint, it's really important too, right? Because if their beliefs are just completely, in opposition to what I believe or opposite to what I believe, it's gonna be hard. Maybe it's hard, but maybe I should stay there and try to change their minds too, right? Make this my own church. And that's really what I am, I guess, really interested in, which is why we have so many churches. I get the fact that we have so many physical locations being churches, but why is it that we have so many churches that are so stagnant in terms of their beliefs, right? It's like people will find these churches, they go to a church, and they bring their existing beliefs. But sometimes they have questions about their beliefs, right? But I find it unfortunate that sometimes it's like they don't know what to think about something. Like people who maybe watch this channel, they're like, I'm not sure how I feel about church or about student protests. So in a way, this is kind of like a church, right? We think through these things, we navigate through them, we try to understand what's best and what's worse. But that's the key. We do it together. We don't just take it at face value what the church tells us, right? So in a weird kind of way, it's like we as humans, no doubt, created these churches, just like we created language, right, to interact with one another. We create these churches to interact with one another, right? So it's really important, and here's my belief on what a church is all about, right? A church is something that us humans, we humans create. We create these churches so that we can interact with one another, to help us not be so lonely, maybe, to help us navigate through some of the questions that we have, right? To navigate through the questions about what is right, what is wrong, right? What is good, what is bad, how we should live, that kind of stuff. Those questions make sense to maybe discuss at a church. But just like we created that building in this neighborhood close to where we live, we need to bring our ideas, just like we bring our languages to these churches too, right? All these things we bring, and it needs to go both ways. We need to contribute to our church, not just let the church tell us what we need to believe, right? So that's one important thing that I do want to emphasize to anyone watching out there. If you are a churchgoer, are you contributing to the beliefs and the language that your church has? In addition to that, well, before I go on and tell you more about my beliefs on what's wrong maybe with our churches right now, and obviously what I believe something wrong right now is that it's just like very unilateral. A lot of people go to church and they're like, all right, you tell me XYZ, I'm gonna do XYZ. Without maybe pushing back and being like, maybe that's how the founder of this church thought, and that's what he or she believed. But hey man, we're the current church members here. Is that how we feel about it? And again, if we don't like what you're telling us, and we don't believe in what you're saying to us, maybe we can change this church, because we want to change this church because it's physically close to us and it's convenient, and we all congregate here and we all believe, something different from XYZ now, right? But I don't see that always. I feel like a lot of people, they go to church and they're just so feeble-minded. They're just like, that church tells me XYZ, so I'm gonna run with XYZ, right? Here's another personal anecdote. This happened to me a few years ago. So I have this old friend, and by the way, I'm gonna just bookmark this idea because I do want to talk about what it means to be a friend one day. So like the definition of friend, right? It's just something that I notice we use that term loosely, but one of these days I'll probably spend a few minutes talking about, for me at least, what the definition of friend is. But this person I do consider a friend. And one day we were hanging out, and he did upset me quite a bit because he expressed views that I think are very I guess homophobic maybe. But it's been a few years now, but I just remember him saying something. Yeah, I'm going to tell you this right now, and hopefully you will never forget this quote either, because there's a lot to learn from this quote. He says something along the lines of, I'm going to paraphrase what he said here, but he said, I'm not against, gay people. I just don't think that they should sit in front of the church. So I'll repeat that. I think he said something very closely to, I'm not against gay people. I just don't think that they should sit in front of the church, right? Or they shouldn't be allowed, I think he said, to sit, at the front of the church. Hilarious, right? Hilarious on so many levels. But here's the funny thing. That's his belief, obviously, right? And I'm sure that whatever church he goes to, if he still goes to church, I think he is a churchgoer. Pretty sure a lot of people at that church believe the same thing that he believes, or feels the same thing, has the same sentiments, right, towards gay people. Maybe, hopefully, not actually, because I have the opposite view. But I guess that's the key. It is what it is, but it doesn't always have to be. So that's another philosophical idea we'll talk about, which is versus ought, right? If you're a churchgoer out there, do you truly believe in all the things that other members of your church believe in? Even the leaders of your church? Do you really believe in what they tell you? Okay. I wonder. I do feel as though we should have a lot of churches, because no matter how much we ask ourselves what the best beliefs are, what the most idealistic and most logical beliefs are, right? I do think that maybe it's so arbitrary. There's no right or there's no wrong. We're going to have, if we have, 4 billion people, and if they all have different beliefs, we should have 4 billion different churches. That's how I look at it, right? But where our beliefs align for the most part, right? Maybe we can say, okay, look, I don't have to believe 100% what you say, but it's close. And we have to live close to each other, right? So let's just prioritize. Out of our 10 most important beliefs, right? In terms of maybe killing or not killing each other, right? Helping the poor or not helping the poor, right? Fixing the climate, or, addressing the climate issues for future generations or not, right? Maybe some of those obvious things, right? We should all be like, yeah. And maybe even show a little humility and be like, do we know more than scientists, or do we not know more than scientists, right? So we can all agree, like, hey man, I believe we should defer to scientists. I do think that we should help future generations out. I do think we should help the poor. And maybe we can then talk about more nuanced things, where it's like, how much should we help the poor? Okay. And it's like, you know what? How about this? All these church members here, if you make less than, $50,000 a year, whatever, you don't have to worry about helping the poor. But if you make more than $100,000 a year, for sure you need to help the poor. Maybe in between, it's up to you. You decide how much you want to help the poor. So all the church members here in this physical location, or this area close to all of us, if you make more than 100,000, you have to help this much. If you make more than $200,000 a year, you have to help this much. If we can come to those kinds of beliefs, right? Then I clearly see why this one church will pop up. This church believes these things. It's going to be different from this church, but it will be so much obvious why this church is different from this church. And it will help me, honestly, if I were to ever be interested in looking for a church. I can be like, I like that church. I fit that demographic. I believe in those core beliefs, and I want to hang out with you guys every now and then, because I get lonely staying at home all the time, right? I need a place to socialize and see people and mingle and all that stuff, right? But that's not how churches are. It's completely nebulous in terms of what this church believes, or this church believes, except for maybe some things. But even when it's not nebulous and it's obvious, are you, as a churchgoer, pushing back against bad ideas, or ideas that you really don't truly believe in, right? Or are you just taking at face value what they tell you, the church leaders there? Because remember, churches, like languages, it's a human construct, okay? They are human constructs. I cannot say that enough. For anyone out there who thinks that churches are like some divine thing, God's like, you know what? I'm going to create this church here. I'm going to create this church here. I'm going to create this church here. I think, I don't know, you may be a little bit impractical, okay? Who knows? There may be some truth to it, but I think what we just described there is probably more significant in terms of what really happens, right? People create churches based on where they live, what they want to believe in. Unfortunately, a lot of church leaders create churches to manipulate others, for power, for wealth, to collect donations, whatever it is, right? To not pay taxes. But it's a very mundane human construct that we create. honestly, there's going to be so many more things that we're going to talk about when it comes to churches. I do think we need to rethink about churches, period, okay? Or always think about what it means to be part of a church, what your contribution to that church is, what your role in that church is, what that role of that church is to you, right? Challenge that church, right? Now, a few more seconds I want to spend, a few more minutes on, I want to circle back to Samuel Alito. And there will be other videos to talk about this notion of separation of church and state for sure. But here, churches are communities that represent, obviously people, but beliefs, right? So let me turn off my notifications here. But so churches, in case you hear them, okay. Churches are communities, right? Things that represent people and their beliefs, right? Let's run with that definition for now, okay? So in another way of looking at it, I would say, our beliefs should define our church, right? Should help guide us to what church we belong to, right? Beliefs in church are, strongly intertwined. So what am I driving at? The notion, I don't want to say that they're synonymous or equal, but let's say they're similar. So it's like separation of church and state. It's kind of like saying separation of beliefs and state. Absurd, right? Why would we ever want to separate our beliefs from state? Makes no freaking sense. So if you're like me, who very cynical and skeptical of a lot of churches, it's probably because I'm very cynical and skeptical of a lot of our beliefs. But I think it's misguided to say, you know what? For me to protect society from bad beliefs, or beliefs that I deem as bad, again, it's very arbitrary, but hopefully I make it a little less arbitrary by explaining to you all my beliefs, right? And showing my work, so to speak. I think it's misguided because if we want to protect ourselves from bad beliefs, it's not enough to just say, let's separate church from state. What we should say is, let's separate ourselves from bad beliefs, okay? So if anything, continue to use churches, challenge our churches so that we can have better beliefs together and understand how to navigate, life together, have more noble, better beliefs for sure. Less, I guess, even less, I want to say superstitious, less archaic, primitive beliefs. This is coming from me, right? Think scientifically, think ethically, think empathetically, think critically. Have great beliefs. Let that drive your church. That will raise up the level of your churches. And then we wouldn't have to worry about separating church from state. We'd be like, great. This Supreme Court justice goes to a church whose beliefs are such that I believe in, because it's so clear and obvious. Maybe that church is pro-science, pro-helping the poor, pro-helping, with climate change initiatives or whatnot, right? And then more nuanced political stuff, like that church believes in taxing those that make over $100,000 this much, taxing those that make over $150,000 this much, whatever. We can talk about that, but I can clearly see I like that church because that church, its members believe in these things, and maybe I see some person that goes to that church, and I want that person to represent us politically, or in the justice system, or in the legislative system, or whatever, right? So don't try to just attack this problem of protecting us or needing to protect ourselves from bad beliefs by just attacking churches. Let's have better beliefs, okay? Because again, churches and beliefs are intertwined. And to separate church from state means to separate beliefs from state. It makes no sense. I want us to have beliefs. I want us to have good beliefs. And I want them to drive how we run our state and our government, okay? And it's a big fallacy to continue thinking that we have separation of church and state, because we don't. It's impossible. If anything, I would be lying to you, or Samuel Alito would be lying to you if he said that he doesn't believe these things, right? It's part of our state now that he has these beliefs, and he's going to bring it to the state. There's no question about that. I don't care what church he goes to, in the sense that the church that he goes to is based on his beliefs. I hope so. I hope that the church is a good representation of his beliefs, right? If not, then poor him. He needs to find another church that represents his beliefs. So I guess, what do you think? There will be more videos about this. Just like that, it's almost a 30-minute video. Tell me what you think about churches in general. Tell me if you think that we should have separation of church and state, right? And tell me if you think it's possible to have separation of church and state. So it's like that is and ought. Is it possible? Do we have it? Ought we have separation of church and state? Is it even a good thing to separate our beliefs from state, right? All right, you guys. I'm new to this. I hope that this video is a fun one, an interesting one. 5 core principles of harboring chaos, okay? Do not forget that, okay? I say I'm new to this because, forgive me if this video is a little crude, etc. We're gonna get better at this. Hopefully you guys find it fun and interesting. Let's review real quickly the 5 core principles. 1, try not to be mean and try not to hurt. 2, try to make a positive impact and fight the good fight. 3, try to have fun. Try to have fun doing this, because it can be very depressing and bleak when we think about humans and what we do to one another, and how we are full of pride and ego and greed and selfishness. So let's not get too depressed and expect too much, for that matter. When we have these videos, we talk about these things, expectations are low, but we're just going to be people watchers, and we're going to look at humans like we look at other animals, through fascinated lens, okay? Through a fascinating lens, okay? Core principle number 4, don't be a hater, and keep this channel positive. This channel is probably not for 99% of the population. It's only for those who are open-minded, okay? It's not for people who are know-it-alls. And even if it were for you today, it may not be for you tomorrow, because your mood may be different, right? So just move along. Please help me keep this channel positive, okay? This channel is not for everyone. Don't be a hater. Core principle number 5, think critically and think empathetically, because everything is arbitrary. All right, you guys, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks so much. So, guess what? My sorry butt almost forgot. We need to write something today, okay? Almost forgot. So, let's spend 2 minutes writing something, okay? I think we can pull it off. First part was about churches, right? I want to say here, well, first, I want to say, separation of church and state is essentially separation of beliefs. Separation of church and state is essentially separation of beliefs and state. The desire for this is misguided. The desire for this is misguided. Separation of church and state is essentially separation of beliefs and state. So, only thing I want to tweak here is, my beliefs on which NFL team is the most exciting to watch. That really doesn't really tie into what people talk about at church or what differentiates a church, right? So I'm going to say core beliefs, right? Core. Separation of core and most important beliefs, okay? I'll capitalize this for now. Separation of church and state is essentially separation of core of our most core, no, core of our most core and important beliefs and states. Okay, so let's read this again. Separation of church and state is essentially separation of our most core and important beliefs and states. Let's take this thing out. There you go. Capitalize this too. Separation of church and state is essentially separation of our most important beliefs and states. Question. Is this really what we want? How about that? Short and sweet. Separation of church and state is essentially separation of our most important beliefs and state. Is this really what we want? Okay, so that's gonna be our writing for today. And again, we could always tweak it later on. But I like it. It conveys what we want to convey. And it doesn't come down too strong in terms of what, I think it's kind of a dumb idea, but I want to ask people, right? Is that really what we want? And maybe we do want that, but only after we have really good, most important beliefs, right? Okay, everyone. I'll see you guys later. Thank you.